Hello, I'm surrounded by sheep today. You can probably see them in the background, and over the years I've done a lot of walking where sometimes I've seen more sheep than people, and sheep go on all kinds of adventures, and I've encountered sheep that have got into difficulties. For instance, on more than one occasion I found a sheep with its head stuck in a fence, and I've tried to rescue it. At first it's very difficult because the body of the sheep reacts violently to me trying to help it. Eventually, thankfully, either through exhaustion or through trust, the sheep starts to relax and allows me to help it to get its head from out of the fencing. Got to be very careful with the ears not to hurt the sheep, and I've been able to help that sheep escape. Another time, not so long ago, I discovered a sheep that was stuck, trapped in brambles all over its body. I put gloves on, I got one hand quite cut, but managed to free the sheep, and it went rushing off. Not a word of gratitude, what can I say? Many times I've found sheep on the wrong side of a fence, and for me it's obvious how it gets back, but the sheep goes up and down, semi-panicking. I guess eventually it finds its way back. So sheep gets up to all kinds of scrapes. And when we read the Bible, we find many references to sheep. And interestingly, in the Gospels, we read Jesus very often talking about sheep. And maybe most famously, on one occasion, he talked about 100 sheep and one that got lost. And we're going to hear that now in the Bible reading. Thank you, Linda.
Luke chapter 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering round to hear him. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbours together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbours together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents.
Thank you, Linda. The story of the lost sheep. You're probably familiar with that story. Let me ask one or two questions arising from the story. First of all, who do you think the lost sheep represents? Well, Jesus tells the story because he's with two groups of people. He's with the Pharisees and the religious leaders on the one hand, and he's with what's described as sinners on the other hand. And it's clear that when Jesus talks about the lost sheep, he's referring to these sinners, many of whom have started to follow Jesus, people who certainly were unbelievers, if no longer unbelievers. The lost sheep represents the person who is yet to find God. A sheep on its own is vulnerable. A sheep on its own, sooner or later, is likely to be in trouble, may well die through predators, tends to be more exposed to the elements, may even go downhill because of the stress of being separated from the rest of the flock. And a sheep on its own is very much like someone who is on their own without God, someone maybe not even aware of the fact that they, like that lost sheep, are in a perilous position. And that was one of the points of Jesus' story. That just as sheep can be lost, so people can be lost. And anyone who doesn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ is characterized as being lost. So, certainly in Jesus' story, the lost sheep represents those sinners, tax collectors, finding Jesus, many of them, not having a good reputation, certainly in the eyes of that other group of people there, the religious leaders, the Pharisees. So, my second question would be, well, who do the 99 sheep represent in Jesus' story? Who do the 99 represent? These are sheep who are not on their own, they're together, and in the story, certainly the impression is that they are safe. And many people would feel that the 99 represent believers, represent maybe we would say the church. People who know God, who have a relationship with God, who follow God, who are safe and sound in the fold of the Good Shepherd. But I would like you just to consider the possibility that actually the 99 don't necessarily represent believers at all. Maybe the 99 are sheep who could be in peril. Maybe the 99 represent those who think they are safe, but actually may not be. And certainly if we think in terms of those religious leaders that were listening to the story, they thought that they were in a good place, in a safe place. They thought that they had a relationship with God. Jesus made it clear that actually, to some extent, that they were spiritually blind. They thought they didn't need to repent. This summed up the religious leaders. And there are people today who are in the church, people today who have a belief in God and yet maybe are not in such a safe place after all, because deep down they either know or they're unaware that they don't really have a profound relationship with God. So, leave you to think about that. We've thought about the lost sheep representing the person that needs to come to God. We've thought about the 99 who could represent those people who are safe in the shepherd's fold, or could represent those who think they are safe but actually are vulnerable. Generally, when we think about sheep, why would you think that sheep are vulnerable? Why are sheep so vulnerable? Well, I'm going to give you 3 suggestions as to why sheep are vulnerable. First of all, sheep are dumb. They are dumb. If you go to a circus, I don't think you're likely to see any trained sheep acts. You might see all other manner of animals who are performing, having been trained in various circus acts, but I don't think you're likely to see any trained sheep performing at a circus, because they are dumb. Sheep are very much dumb animals. Secondly, sheep are defenseless. Now this is more important. Not only are they dumb, but they are defenseless. They're vulnerable because unlike other animals, they don't have claws, they don't have sharp teeth, they don't have a hard shell, they don't even have speed in order to escape predators. Other animals are able to defend themselves much more easily, but sheep are on the whole defenseless. And thirdly, I've said that they're dumb and they're defenseless. They're also directionless. What do I mean by that? They're directionless. Well, cats and dogs, for instance, and you may be a pet owner, you may have a cat or a dog, and therefore you'll be able to resonate with the idea that cats and dogs are able to find their own way back home. Particularly cats, but dogs also. I had a dog for 17 years. I loved my dog. Its name was Coco, and sometimes I would take Coco for a walk, and maybe my 3 children would be with me, and we would go to a park. We would let Coco off the lead and she would wander around happily, and then I would set up a game of cricket with my children. It was generally me and my daughter against my 2 sons. My 2 sons used to take the game very seriously. My daughter would join in for fun, but she only had one shot when she batted, which was basically putting the ball high in the air on the onside. So both my sons knew that they could catch her very easily. They just ran to the same side, and it was very frustrating for me in one sense, because my two sons used to win the game almost every time while my daughter was singing all kinds of Christian songs, would you believe. Anyway, that was great fun. But the reason I tell you the story today is because sometimes we'd have our game, we'd be playing for about half an hour, and then we'd look round and we'd say, "Where's Coco? Where's Coco? I'm sure she was here a minute ago. Where is she?" And we'd start looking for Coco, not able to find her. And then after a while, experience taught her that we shouldn't panic, that if we went home, that there would be a good chance that she would be there, and actually a very good chance, because unless someone had taken her to the police station, which did happen on more than one occasion, I admit, generally when we got home, there we would find Coco completely happy, and my wife would say, "What have you been doing? Coco came back 20 minutes ago on her own." At least she knew where she lived, and she could get back home very easily from the park if she got bored with us playing our cricket, taking no notice of her. She'd done her business, she'd finished for the day, and therefore she wanted to go off home. I tell you that story as an example of what I'm talking about, that some animals can find their own way home. Cats, dogs, but not sheep. Sheep are directionless, and I know that from years of walking amongst sheep. They go in all kinds of directions, which is why they have to be kept in. You know, I was walking just the other day. I'll tell you another story. This is a true story. I was amazed to find a notice by this gate saying, "Penalty for not closing and locking the gate, £1,000 fine." Shall I tell you why? Because that gate was next to a railway. The other side of the gate were lots of sheep. You leave the gate open and you get the obvious happening, sheep going through the gate, getting on the track. It could lead to serious problems. I tell you, I made sure that I closed and locked that gate just a couple of days ago. Sheep, you can't have too many bright hopes with sheep, because they'll let you down. They're directionless, they're clueless. So sheep naturally are vulnerable animals, and in a way, as human beings, maybe we should feel insulted that Jesus seemed to suggest that we were just like sheep. I'm not sure we should be insulted, because actually, just as a lost sheep needs to be rescued, we also need a rescuer, because believe it or not, we are just as helpless at rescuing ourselves at times as sheep are, particularly when we stray away from God. When we stray away from God, we need someone to find us. We need a shepherd to find us. Specifically, we need a good shepherd to find us. We need the Lord Jesus, who said, "I am the good shepherd, who gives my life for the sheep, who lays down my life for the sheep." That's the one that we need. He's the one that we need to rescue us. And it's a wonderful picture of grace here in this story of the lost sheep being found. The shepherd finds the lost sheep. The shepherd doesn't berate the wandering sheep, but lays it on his shoulders and brings it home. What a great story that is. And it's a great story, actually, if we're able to testify today that once I was a lost sheep, but no longer am I lost, because I've been found by the Good Shepherd. I hope that that's your testimony today. But here in this passage in Luke chapter 15, Jesus actually tells three stories about lostness. He talks about the lost sheep. Most famously, he talks about the lost son, but we're not going to talk about the prodigal son today. But before I finish, I do want to talk about the second story, which is a story about a coin. A story about a coin. Now, I need to ask a question here about the coin, because after all, if we were to lose, a 50 pence coin, I'm not sure many of us would get too uptight about that. But this woman does get uptight about losing her coin. But you need to understand that this is not any old coin, but almost certainly what Jesus was referring to, and I think his original listeners would have understood this, that this coin, this silver coin, was part of a set of 10 silver coins that would have been fixed on the headdress, the wedding headdress of a woman. So for this woman, it would have had great sentimental value, this headdress, for when she got married, and one of these coins were missing. So it meant more than just losing a 50 pence coin. This coin had real sentimental value. And of course, in the story that Jesus told, she looked for the coin, a little bit concerned, to put it mildly, and then she finds the coin. She finds the coin, and she throws a great big party to celebrate. So we want to think about the celebration that's going on here. And maybe ask another question. Was it normal in Jesus' day to throw this kind of party over the discovery of a lost coin, even if it was a coin of sentimental value as this was? Was it normal to throw a party if a shepherd had 99 sheep that were safe and lost one and then found the lost one? Was that normal? What's the answer to the question? No, it wasn't normal. It was abnormal. It wouldn't have happened. And that is Jesus' point. That is actually his main point. Of course, we're thinking about lost sheep and lost coins representing people who are lost away from God, who are needing to find salvation, needing to be saved by the Good Shepherd. And that is very much at the centre of the story. But also, it's important that you realise that Jesus was telling this story to emphasise the joy in heaven over the redemption of a sinner, over one person who comes to Christ, who comes to faith. And what Jesus was saying is, look, and he's telling the religious leaders, he's telling that group of sinners that when one person comes to faith, there is a party in heaven. And it's a kind of an over-the-top, ecstatic, wild kind of celebration. And the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they resented that Jesus was spending time with this lowlife. They resented that he was becoming very jubilant because many of these people were repenting and putting their trust in God. And Jesus is saying, you got it wrong. You got it entirely wrong, because my attitude of jubilation is revealing the attitude of my Father in heaven. Now, I put it to you today that this is staggering. This is staggering. One of the most staggering facts in the Bible. This concept of God, the creator of the whole universe, showing unrestrained joy because somebody, one individual, a feeble human being, actually makes a decision to follow him. And God shows this kind of ecstasy, this kind of over-the-top joy. And let me tell you something. If you're a Christian, the day that you put your trust in him, heaven had a party over you. Isn't that wonderful? And if there's someone you know who isn't a Christian, then you need to know that if you lead that person to Christ, there'll be another party in heaven. Not because of what you've done, but because that person that you love has found faith. So perhaps that might just help you to pray for them and to talk to them and to lead them to God for their own sake, and so there can be another party in heaven because that person has found God. So, isn't that interesting? So I'm going to come to a conclusion now and tell you a story that George Orwell, the author, told many years ago. It's an unusual story. He said this, that he was enjoying his afternoon tea and maybe a scone, who knows, but he was out in the garden, I think, and he noticed that there was a wasp sucking jam on his plate. And you know what George Orwell did? Well, it's a strange thing to do, and you and I wouldn't do it, but he actually got his knife and he cut the wasp in half. That's what he did. But George Orwell says that the wasp went on with his meal. Would you believe? Even though the wasp was now in two pieces, it carried on sucking the jam on his plate. And it was only when the wasp tried to fly away that the insect understood its dreadful condition. Well, Orwell makes the point that that wasp and unbelievers, those who have yet to put their trust in God, have much in common. And he says about unbelievers, severed from their souls, these unbelievers continue to eat, drink and be merry, and only when it's time to fly away will they understand their dreadful condition. So, my question as I conclude this morning is this: what is your condition? What is your condition? Let me tell you that Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is searching for lost people. He's searching for those who are lost. And perhaps he's reaching out to you today. So if he is, what's your response? Are you going to ignore him? Are you going to dismiss him as those Pharisees did in Jesus' day? Or are you going to let him carry you home with unrestrained, ecstatic, over-the-top joy for him and for you? Something to think about. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you.